everyone, and thank you for joining us. My name is Palma Accardi, and you are watching Tidal Flooding Talk. We are brought to you by the New Jersey Coastal Coalition and filmed live every Sunday night here at the Irish Pub in Atlantic City.
All right, and take two. I appreciate you guys pointing out the sound issues. I think we got them sorted out. If not, please let us know in the comments section. Of course, always feel free to comment. Technical issues, weather forecast questions, and a question for our guest. We always love bringing you a different guest from the title, from the flooding talk field, or something related to it. And we head you north to Ocean County tonight, north from where we are in Atlantic City. David McKeon, former planning director from Ocean County, and spent decades and a whole career in Ocean County planning. And great having you here. And just to kick us off tonight, for those that didn't hear with the audio issues the first time, tell us a little bit about yourself, David.
Certainly. I live up in Ocean County now, as you said. However, I grew up locally. I grew up in Somers Point, was there until I went away to college to Rutgers University, graduated there with a degree in environmental planning, and then got my first job out of college in Toms River working for Ocean County way back in 1985, started entry level and never left. So worked my way up to director and was director for 10 years before I retired in December of 2017.
Well, thanks for being with us tonight. And again, any questions for David, feel free to post them. We'll also get a little weather forecast for you. Impending weather, no tidal flooding, but a little snow on the way tonight, tomorrow, then some rain later in the week. We'll talk all about that and answer those questions that any of you have as we go through the live stream.
Now, you got your degree in environmental planning from Rutgers, so does that mean you always knew this is what you wanted to do?
Yeah, about halfway through college, I knew that this is what I wanted to do. Sort of the light bulb went off. And working for the planning department, we're involved in a number of programs, but resiliency was one big issue. Growing up along the shore and experiencing storms myself and needing to evacuate occasionally and dealing with some flooding issues. But really everything hit home after Sandy 6.5 years ago. And things changed the way we looked at storm response and really preparation.
How did you look at storms pre-Sandy? So let's start there, and then we could talk about the changes. But you know, what was the approach? Because really, after the '62 storm, which was a nor'easter, not a tropical system, but was the benchmark storm until Sandy. We kind of had a relatively quiet 1970s and 80s, and Sandy was the next really big one. But what was the approach pre-Sandy?
Well, the '62 storm was a big milestone in Ocean County as well, particularly Long Beach Island. I was just born 6 months after that, so the only storms I had experience with were the storms that hit. It could be bad for a day, maybe two. If it's a snowstorm, you dig out. But it's gone and everyone goes back to normalcy. Sandy was something different, and that hit our northern beaches especially hard. In those cases, people couldn't even go back to their homes for months. Areas of Lavallette, Seaside Heights, Ortley Beach, particularly hard hit. And then as well as areas on the mainland that had never flooded before. And they had to deal with not power out for several hours or a day, but power out for weeks. And that also affects emergency response. We were talking earlier before we started, and a lot of people were prepared for generators, but if the power's out and the gasoline stations don't have a way to pump gasoline, the generators run out and you're out. So, as well as traffic lights and other things. So it was an experience that no one had lived through that was younger than 50.
Right. Okay.
I do want to get back to talking about Sandy soon, but first, with the exception of repairs needed for storms, how much is flood protection considered when the county is planning a project?
It's essential. I mean, you have to look at what area that you're in, and if you're in a flood hazard area, there are design standards that you need to build to. Some of that is regulation, you have to, but others is just common sense. If an area is susceptible to flooding, you have to build to a higher standard to protect that investment. Otherwise, you're going to rebuild it again and again. So there's an additional cost to build it, but it saves you money in the long run.
In Ocean County, huge chunk of real estate in East Central New Jersey, and it's not just the ocean that you guys deal with as far as flooding goes, because you have bays, you have marshes, and as you mentioned, tidal rivers as well that go well back into the county as well. So
Correct.
so flooding is not something that just folks along Long Beach Island, for instance, will have to deal with. A large percentage of Ocean County residents are probably in flood-prone areas.
Correct. And we had an awful lot of damage on the mainland communities as well, particularly in Little Lake Harbor and Mystic Islands and some of the lagoon communities further north, Beach Haven West. Those people were also out of their homes, in some cases years, until they could be redeveloped.
And how do you, before Sandy and even after Sandy, people that didn't experience it, didn't lose anything. How do you accurately convey that? It sounds mind-boggling. You might be out of your home for months, if not longer. Most people are of the attitude it's a day or two tops. If it's a storm. But that's a major point to try to get to people that a worst-case scenario is going to be on the order of weeks or months. Is there a way you can effectively communicate that and prepare someone for that?
I do think that's one of the things the Coastal Coalition is trying to do, is to do a better job of getting that message out. When the weather's been good, it's hard to get people to pay attention. But even when I was a kid, we used to hear about potential for a major hurricane, and it was rare. But they said at some point you may get a Category 3, 4, or 5, and then all the bets are off. And I think Sandy, while it wasn't that level of a storm, it was an odd storm the way it combined with the nor'easter.
Sure.
And it's about education, and certain people, particularly people that have lived around here a while, are aware that it occasionally floods and sometimes the storms are bad, and they're willing to accept that risk. But it's very, very important that people know that risk and make that decision themselves. And that is particularly true for people that own second homes. And we've heard that too, because that is a hard message to convey. They may come down, they may spend summers at the shore and not go through a storm and decide to retire here and really not get an idea of some of the year-round risks.
Good point.
Now, if you do live on a barrier island, I'm sure you've seen or even heard about what your city's first response was, the immediate response after Superstorm Sandy. But what was the county's immediate response to really any flood event, particularly Sandy?
Well, we like other counties, have an emergency management office, and they were the ones that pretty much took the lead on storm response and dealing with damaged infrastructure, bridges out, so on and so forth, evacuation centers, etc. It was coordinated. And so that was pretty much the extent of it, and it worked well, and it does work well in most cases. This storm was different in that we were dealing with months, in some cases years, with people out instead of a couple of days. And we, or my department in Ocean County, got involved with FEMA, our emergency management agency, our municipalities, and various groups like the Board of Realtors, Chambers of Commerce, those that could help, because FEMA comes in and they do a good job, they do what they can, but a lot of these people are coming from elsewhere in the country and they have no idea what this area is like. They don't know where to get rental units, they don't know where to store things, they don't know where to haul debris out and store it until it can be disposed. We have to provide all that information, and we did establish a network at trying to find people temporary homes, at dealing with debris, not just the debris that was in the roads at the time, but once that debris is cleared and people are allowed back onto the island or into their neighborhoods, they get to their homes and it's filled with wet carpets, wet furniture, and all of that stuff goes out to curbside. And we have photos of mounds and mounds of garbage that have to be dealt with before you can even get back to any sense of normalcy. And those are the directions that I think we're going in now, is to be more resilient ahead of time in case another Sandy hits. Or I should say, when another Sandy hits, maybe it's 2 years, maybe it's 100, but it's going to happen, and whoever is here needs to be prepared and be able to act quickly.
Now, were some of those cities opened up to the public sooner than others, or?
They were, depending on the extent of damage. However, up on the northern barrier coast, where Seaside Heights is, Lavallette, Ortley Beach, some of those towns were ready before other towns, but the decision had to be made not to let anybody on the island, because if a town further up the coast is fine, but the one that you had to drive through is not, the police didn't want people driving through those areas, and they were dangerous because in some cases you had to make sure all the natural gas was shut off, all power lines were shut off, if there were damaged sewer pipes, that was dealt with, and just what came later with any mold or any standing water that had been there. So some towns were ready, but people couldn't get back to their neighborhoods until everything was ready along the route to get there. And that caused a lot of hardship. And to this day, there are still some homeowners that are affected. Not nearly the amount of the first year or two, but it's difficult to rebuild from something like that. And it's difficult to follow the regulations and to deal with the bureaucracy, which is there to get through that, to get back into your homes.
Do you think, I mean, as a meteorologist, and I know I've talked about it with previous guests, getting people to evacuate in the first place is very difficult. It's tough to convince some people to leave. Since you just mentioned it in your previous answer, how hard is it to keep people, I mean, after a storm, they want to get back to their homes, and if people in this town are being allowed back, I mean, do you get a lot of it? I know farther south where the wait wasn't, weeks like it was in some Ocean County towns. It was days. There was still some animosity. There was still some hostility. When one island opens and another doesn't, and everyone just wants to get back and start picking up the pieces of their lives. So how do you deal with that aspect of the storm and dealing with just human nature, people wanting to return home?
Well, those decisions come at the higher levels from the state and even sometimes the federal government, that they just have to make the decision, and from the governor's office, as to what is acceptable and what's not, to allow people for their own safety. And that's really where law enforcement comes in. And some people understand, some people don't. Some people couldn't access their homes via bridges because they were roadblocked by law enforcement, but they managed to get in a boat and get there anyway. And it's human nature. You'd want to see what your home looked like. You'd want to be able to salvage anything. But it's difficult, and it's a situation that there's no right answer to. You just have to keep people out of harm's way.
Now, what do you think our greatest challenges here on the Jersey coast is for, flood resiliency?
Yeah. I think the greatest challenge is probably the communication element that we talked about earlier, is at least getting people to realize first and make decisions. And some people are aware of risks. We've heard of that before, where some people say, hey, I love living on the island. I know they're, and maybe they're inconvenienced several times a year with having to move their cars, etc. And they know sometimes that big storm may hit, but they say it's worth the risk, so they accept it. The problem we have is people that don't know, as we said, people that have not lived here, people that only have seen sunny days in the summer, and those are the people that are the tougher ones to convince. But there are other things to be done, obviously, to be more resilient, is to harden the infrastructure, the dune systems that can be controversial, but I think most people believe are effective, to make our coast the most resilient possible, and then changing building codes, because you cannot build new structures on the ground when you're on an island or you're in floodplains. They need to be built up. And those building codes evolve over time. And that's something that happens now. And that's something that's a benefit, also tied into flood insurance rates, because that's the other whammy here, that if you live at the coast, you live in a floodplain, you're going to pay a lot for flood insurance unless your home is fully compliant with the development standards so that it can withstand storms. If you're not, you're going to pay a lot of money, and it's going to be unaffordable. And it's better to know that in advance than when it's too late.
Do you think having storms like Sandy help the education process? I mean, obviously, there's nothing really good that comes out of Sandy, as far as its negative impact on property and life.
Right.
But planning departments, emergency managers, FEMA, everyone learns something, how to be better from the next storm. Do you think having a storm like Sandy or any significant nor'easter, something that we haven't seen before, does that help? I know it helps you guys professionally, but does it help the spreading awareness part. You
It
know,
does.
people see it can happen here and see how bad it can be.
It does, and the other benefit, even looking at FEMA now, is that they respond to disasters all over the country and even outside of the U.S. sometimes. Each one is a little different, what they face. And in New Jersey and in New York and Long Island and so on, the coast is a lot different than it is in other areas, so you have to respond differently. And I think even some of the FEMA people, I know some of the FEMA people that came in and worked with us, learned things here and can apply it to other developed areas that maybe they didn't know before, and they told us they didn't. One of the things that we did in responding to the massive amount of debris that was generated by the storm is Ocean County took the lead at hiring the contractors necessary. You couldn't just have your garbage collectors go out there and pick up it. You'd get down half a block before your trucks fill. We had to get national help, major contractors to come in here. But knowing that our municipalities, particularly the smaller ones, couldn't afford to go under contract, hire them, spend money, the county agreed to do a cooperative agreement where it took the lead, working with most of our municipalities affected. They signed the contracts, they hired the contractors, they paid the bills, they applied to FEMA for reimbursements, and then whatever was left over that FEMA would not reimburse, then the county would bill the towns at a later date so that they could focus on the immediate things they needed to do and not worrying about contract laws and hiring this and making sure the work was done. That was something new to FEMA that they hadn't really seen, at least the people that we had hired. And it worked very well, and the state of New Jersey was very, very helpful at the end. They ended up footing the bill for anything. FEMA covered 90%. The state of New Jersey came in eventually and provided the rest of the money so that all the money that was outlaid by Ocean County was reimbursed. But we were able to do something very quickly. And at first FEMA was like, we're not sure how to work this out. We used to work with the local governments. They learned something there, and it was quite effective, and something that at least helped us clean up much quicker than we would have normally.
Is that something you've ever dealt with any other storm or flooding event?
No, that's at least, again, in my lifetime, as I said, Sandy was different, and that created the need to do that. If there was another Sandy or something worse, I'm sure it'll be easier to do something, but we would do the same thing. It's much quicker and much more efficient to do it that way.
You're officially retired now and
Yes.
enjoying retirement, except for these, these much appreciated Coastal Coalition appearances. And I know
Right.
you're still, doing some work with the Coastal Coalition, which is great, and we appreciate. What do you think is the biggest challenge? You know, we learned so much from Sandy, and having to go through everything that Sandy put us through. What is the biggest challenge, awaiting us from that next major storm? So let's say it's a 62-like storm coming up the coast next week, which is not in the forecast, or it's a Category 2 hurricane making landfall in New Jersey this summer. What is the biggest challenge for the New Jersey shore?
That's a good question in the sense that some of the things you want people to do, they're doing, like taking warnings seriously, evacuations. A lot of times you're going to get people now that do that, even though they're false alarms. Most people, and I, just to give a plug for weather forecasting, it's much more improved now, where if they forecast a major hurricane is going to strike in 2 days, people are more inclined to say, I believe it, I'm out of here. There's always could be some wiggle room. So it's not getting people to leave. The other benefit, of course, is the building codes are getting stronger. The evacuation routes, they're always being improved, and infrastructure is being hardened. And I would say the other benefit, of course, is the temporary sheltering plans have improved. But the biggest challenge, I think, is, again, to get the word out to people. And in certain areas, towns are going to see this themselves, and they do see it. It's not worth trying to protect certain low-lying areas after a while if it continues. We have some communities, and I'm going to say relatively small communities at this point, but they flood maybe a dozen times a year. And when you put a Sandy storm on top of those, or a half a Sandy storm, you're getting a lot of damage. And at some point, it isn't worth the cost. As you said, is it worth the cost to invest? You're losing a lot of money. And those are the toughest challenges I think we're going to face coming up is, what are those areas that it's isn't going to be worth trying to save.
I mean, we've seen that a little bit along Delaware Bay, where there have been little shore towns,
Right.
Much smaller scale than some of your Ocean County communities, but they gave up. They said, all right, we're giving back this town because it's not worth it.
Right, and it is starting to happen more and more, and a lot of it now is voluntary, but it just shows you the scope of the problems in some areas that people are throwing their hands up and saying, I'm getting out of here, and as much as they love their communities, it's gotten too bad. So those are the areas that need to be identified, and we need to work with local communities and residents as well. And you go for the people that say, I want to get out now, and maybe it makes more sense in certain areas. And I know Ocean County has just started doing that in certain areas that are isolated, but way out in the marsh, like the Delaware communities. We need to do a better resiliency job of not putting those people in harm's way.
Now we're going to get to our Facebook comments in just a couple minutes. So if you have any questions, send them in now. I think my last question would be, what do you think that the county should be focusing on now?
Well, you always need to be preparing and needing to be more resilient. The county is already doing some things more and more after Sandy. For instance, the Community Rating System Steering Committee. A lot of communities do that. The more resilient you are, the better, the more deductions you get on flood insurance because it shows you can withstand a storm. Ocean County over the last couple of years got a steering committee together made of its various towns so they can share their stories, they can work with each other, they can see what works, what doesn't work, what's a waste of time, and what they should be investing in, and how to communicate that to FEMA, how to communicate that to Army Corps of Engineers, the DEP, whatever agencies, and work together and bring in other agencies that we didn't always talk to, such as realtors. How can we quickly find out where there are vacant units? How can we access anything from economic development grants to housing assistance grants to repair grants? All of that is happening now. And the good thing about the Coastal Coalition and why I became involved is because that's happening at a larger scale now. It happened grassroots. It's expanding. Ocean County recently passed a support resolution over the last couple of weeks where they support these efforts. And we have to do this together. And we're not all experts in all areas. Some people are experts in this or this, that. We need to bring those people together, and that's what's happening. The good thing about it, too, is we're attracting the attention of state. FEMA is a regular participant because, again, FEMA can learn from things, and they are. And they're helping us, and I think we're helping them.
I think Ocean County has a lot to offer, too, having been more directly impacted. Ocean and Monmouth counties hit harder than South Jersey. You guys went through a lot of stuff that areas farther south or farther north did not. It's never good being in ground zero or the worst part of a hurricane, except that you have the story to tell and you have just the experiences that so many other people can learn from.
Right.
All right, well, I want to thank all our Facebook viewers. Get some in Florida tonight. Snowbirds listening to the show, so they're up here in the summertime. People who reluctantly congratulate the Patriots on the Super Bowl. Hence my shirt.
He's
Reluctantly,
not letting us
but I
forget.
appreciate it. No, it's a very subtle Patriots. There's no logo or anything like that. So let's see. Just a lot of folks saying hi. Asking about snow tonight and tomorrow. We can quickly talk about that. No tidal flooding, guys. All right, this is not a coastal storm per se, but we are going to get snow tonight. It develops tonight and early tomorrow morning. Some slick spots. There probably are and will be some delays in closings. All right, we're talking probably 1 to 3 inches of snow for most of us from Ocean and Cape May and Atlantic counties. Not much in North Jersey. This is another South Jersey special. It will tomorrow be a light mix of sleet, rain, ice, and snow. You might get an additional coating, and then Tuesday it all washes away, and it's rain, and it's upper 40s, and we get rid of it all. Are you a snow lover, David, or not?
I am.
You are? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So 1 to 3 inches tonight, and a little less towards Cape May, a little less north of Tom's River, but really from exit 80 down to like exit 10 on the Parkway, there is your 1, 2, or 3 inches of snow and some slick spots, but not a major nor'easter. And a major nor'easter is something we really haven't had this year. We haven't had a classic, tidal flooding, major, double-digit snowfall, thankfully. But we all know, and you guys know in planning, it can go right through March and sometimes even April. And I want to say back in 2008, there was a Mother's Day nor'easter too, if I'm not mistaken. So it's a year-round threat, right?
Yeah. Last
Mother
year,
Nature.
March, we had a lot of snowstorms last year. So.
We did. March has been the tough month of winter last year.
Was it 4?
I believe it was 3 or 4 snowstorms last March. Yep. I want to appreciate all you guys viewing. Again, we are here every Sunday night. We have been here every Sunday night for a year as of next week. So a 1-year anniversary show next week. Tom Heist, I believe, was one of our first guests. Actually, he was our practice guest when we were preparing to do this show. Palma and I both needed some work, so Tom was our kind of guinea pig, and he'll be back as a real guest next week. 1 year of providing you Tidal Flooding Talks, except during Eagles games or big Eagles games or Super Bowls or holidays. We love being here every Sunday night, and all brought to you by the New Jersey Coastal Coalition.
Yeah, you are welcome to actually join us here live at the Irish Pub, so we will be here next Sunday for our 1-year anniversary show, so we welcome anyone to join us. And thank you again for coming. We would like to show our appreciation with an Irish Pub t-shirt.
Cool. Very nice.
All right, David McKeon,
cool.
thank you so much for
Thank
being
you.
here. Really appreciate
Thank
it.
you, Dave.
Thank you.
And we'll get you everyone home before the little bit of snow tonight. Doesn't take a lot of snow to create some slick travel. Hopefully none next Sunday for our anniversary show. Hope to see you then, either here at the pub or online. Again, every Sunday night, Jersey Coastal Coalition and Irish Pub. Tidal Flooding Talk. Come back soon.